Hi, everyone. My name is Vikas. As many of you know, I've often talked about human capital and the importance of human capital, and how challenging finding the right people to join a team is, or how do you construct a leadership team. And often what happens in the world is we often look at companies and consultancy businesses and places like that we think where the footprint of really talented people exists. But I couldn't think of anything further from that in terms of whenever I've experienced with leaders in the NGO sector, they have impressed me incredibly. And today, I am pleased that someone who I admire greatly, Safeena Husain, is part of this T4 TV live stream. So welcome to this live stream, Safeena. And you know that I'm a signed up advocate and supporter of your work. But welcome to our live stream.
Thank you, Vikas. It's so nice to be here, and thank you for creating this platform for sharing and learning, really. So thank you.
It's a pleasure. And Safeena, when we talk about Educate Girls as the NGO that you founded and you're the executive director for, do you want to tell those on here in terms of what exactly Educate Girls is, what it does, and also a little bit into where you came up with the idea and what inspired you to get going?
Yeah. Thank you, Vikas. It's always a hard question for me to answer, why Educate Girls, but it was an extension of my own journey. I grew up in New Delhi, very poor. There was a lot of violence, abuse in my childhood. And really my life raft was my education. The fact that whatever the struggles were, that I sort of continued with my education, and my life changed when, because of the help of a lot of people, I ended up at London School of Economics, and just that opportunity just kind of changed my life. And so, living in London, living overseas, and then coming back to India, it was the sort of natural space for me to say, look at what it did for me, and I wanted to be able to do the same for other girls and really be able to create those opportunities for other girls who are not in school.
And so, Safeena, when you talk about this issue that we have regarding out of school girls, can you just give everyone the contours of this or the scale of the challenge that we face today? And then, in that context, why do you think that such a humongous challenge is a problem that can be solved?
Yeah. So just in terms of a context, first of all, a lot of progress has happened with, especially in India, like with the Right to Education Act, large number of girls have made it to the school system. So that's all great. So there's all good news on the major front in terms of the numbers. However, there's a last mile problem, right? So your rural, remote, tribal areas, those and vulnerable groups like girls who may be orphans or special needs or whatever, that chunk of the problem still remains and remains rather substantially. So the world over, about 52 million out of school girls, which is majority of the number of children who are out of school, majority of them tend to be girls. In India, we have the third highest number of out of school girl population, and this is pre-COVID. We think the pandemic is obviously going to make that situation much, much worse. So we have one of the third highest numbers anywhere on the planet. Given the chunk of the problem and the large problem, I believe that it is a problem that we can and we must solve in our lifetime. And I have two reasons for it. One is that it's a problem you only have to solve once, right? You educate a girl and she is 200% more likely to educate her children. So you actually have an opportunity, if you invest today, you have an opportunity to break this intergenerational cycle of illiteracy and poverty. So that's one big thing. The second, and this was much more interesting, and I learned this, when we started doing the development impact bond, and we were so like data and technology focused and stuff. There's a big insight that came up for me, and that is that out of school girls are not equally distributed across the planet. They're actually in major hotspots. And we have amazing data because of our work and the way we work. But we realized and in partnership with ID Insight, I don't know if you know them, but great organization. And they looked at all of our data, and we looked at the publicly available data like the census and DICE, etc. And the hypothesis that we have come up with, based on a lot of evidence, is that 40% of out-of-school girls in India are actually in 5% of the villages.
Wow.
So A, it's a problem you need to solve once, because then you'll break the cycle forever. And second, and this is a major opportunity, that it is geographically constrained problems. And if you focused on those areas, and obviously these are villages that are the most remote, they are villages that are poorest, but if you put a lens of precision targeting, you can actually solve it much faster in a really accelerated way. So those are the two things that make me think that, yep, we can do it, and we must do it.
And so what do Educate Girls do? And what is it that makes your work so different from everyone else that's engaged in the girls' education sector?
So I think, let me describe how we do it, and then I'll pick up some of the elements that I think kind of differentiate us. What we do is, we first try and figure out where's the problem, the largest chunk of the problem, and we choose those geographies to expand into. And it's a very execution-focused, boots-on-the-ground approach. So once, let's say, we'll decide that these are the top districts in India for out-of-school girls, and these are the villages that may have, in those districts, that may have the highest number of out-of-school girls through a lot of predictive analytics work. We actually take about 9 months to set up shop, hiring people, training people, and then we do a census-like door-to-door survey. So we basically knock on, if let's say, like right now, we are scaling into around 3,500 to 4,000 villages. Those villages, our team actually canvass every single household. And we will be mapping for every child, whether in school, out of school, if out of school, why, boys, girls, everybody. That gives us a brilliant amount of data. It tells us who the out-of-school girls are and exactly where they are, because each village is geotagged, each house is geotagged, and we can build heat maps very quickly.
Wow.
And once we know where the problem is, then we deploy resources, and we create village-level champions called Team Malika, which is just a team for the girl child. Currently, we have over 14,000 at the village level. And then with them, so these are educated youth in the village, right? With them, we then start the enrollment process, convincing parents, communities, neighborhoods, bringing them back into the school. And then we actually support the children in the school through their learning and life skills program. So that's it's a whole school model. It goes from finding the out-of-school girl, enrolling her into school, making sure she's staying and learning.
Wonderful. And I remember the case that you make, and has been well documented about, if we solve girls' education, we also act as a multiplier, a force multiplier for other issues like climate change. Do you want to talk about that a little bit as well?
Yeah. So, and again, and I link it to where they are, right? All the out-of-school girls are actually, they are in what creates out-of-school girls is an intersection of poverty and social marginalization. So villages which are the poorest, villages which are the most marginalized, let's say they're tribal, that's where you're going to have an explosion of out-of-school girls. These are also the villages that will have all the other problems like malnutrition, child marriage, poor health outcomes, all kinds of things, poverty, so no livelihood, etc. So when you focus on girls' education, you actually solve for all of those things. If a girl is educated, you actually impact 9 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Everything, health, your malnutrition figures, immunization. Immunization goes up 40% if the mother is educated. So all of those indicators actually get impacted, including climate change. So if you read Project Drawdown, where the climate scientists have voted 80 actions to reduce global warming, at number 6 is girls' education. Wow. Because it will do 2 things. One is it helps to reduce fertility. Fertility rates go down as mothers are educated. But more than that, I think what appeals to me is it also builds climate resilience. And women and girls are going to be paying the highest price of climate change, right? Girls who have to walk to fetch water, etc. So really, it's building resilience and about reduction in fertility rates that actually impacts climate, but everything else as well, like I said, 9 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals.
Thanks a lot for that, Safeena. It's really insightful in terms of what you have presented. That girls' education can act as a force multiplier for many different areas, and I'm sure the teachers that are watching this from all over the world will absolutely understand what you're saying because they see it daily in their classes and in their communities. I actually want to now move you on to a discussion around the pandemic. And what is that really meant for girls in India's villages?
Yeah. it has not been good because, like I said, the cause or the root causes behind girls being out of school are the 2 P's, poverty and patriarchy. And the pandemic has made both of them much worse. We've had reverse migration, we've had loss of livelihoods, we've had people have been pushed back into extreme poverty because of the pandemic. And also because of the lockdown, the household behavior changes all regressed, right? It's like patriarchy strikes back. Women have gone back to the gendered role of cooking, cleaning, and only being in the house and looking after people. So I think that has really been very, very, very hard. We've seen at the ground level who have been pushed into child marriage because that's one less mouth to feed. I have seen hunger impact girls much more deeply because even in normal times, this, Vikas, in our homes, women and girls are the last to eat and eat what is left over. Right? And that's, we call it a tradition and culture and whatever else. They'll serve you first and then they will eat. And all of this, it means that when food is less, when resources are less, they pay the highest price, whether it's hunger, whether it's safety. We've seen the data on violence against women. So the pandemic is actually, the shadow pandemic is what's happening to our women and girls.
And so, like my friend James Wanjohi from South Africa has just said, he's reiterated your point as well. But tell me, in terms of, I see a lot of statistics with regards to girls' education in Africa in particular, in that, COVID has obviously had a huge impact on education and school systems, and more so on girls. And what is your solution to how we prevent girls remaining out of school when the schools open?
Yeah. The way I've been thinking about it in my head is like, how do you tackle these 2 P's, right? Of poverty and patriarchy. And what we've been thinking internally at Educate Girls is that we need to tackle them with the 3 R's, which is relief, recovery, and then reimagining, right? And relief was the first thing because we knew that hunger will impact our girls the most, and we had data to actually show where they were and what villages were, because out of school girl just became a proxy for vulnerability, right? It is a proxy indicator. So relief, first and foremost, we pivoted last year just to deliver food supplies to the doorstep. And we delivered food for over 500,000 individuals, over 100,000 households. And that was the immediate relief. And whether it was information on how do you save yourself from, prevent COVID and social distancing and all the rest of it, and making sure that till the last mile the information was there. Whether you sharing information on social protection schemes and connecting them to social protection schemes so that you could tackle poverty. And then we've kind of moved to recovery, which is that right now there is so much fear and schools are closed that we actually move to community-based learning. Our girls have no access to devices. They don't have access to phones. They don't have access to digital learning. They can't move to an EdTech solution. These are, I think, just even a regular feature phone. Most of my villages, the penetration would be like 11%. So that is not an option. And this also brings you to the whole digital divide, not just at the last mile, but also from a gender perspective. Even if there's a phone in the house, the girl doesn't get to use it, right? So we actually figured out that to be able to support our girls, we would actually need to have to teach her face-to-face, but in small community bubbles, like small groups. So we've pivoted from teaching in the school to actually teaching in the village. And this teaching is more about her social, mental well-being, a lot of home visits to constantly keep in touch because these girls will disappear. Our worry is that these girls will be married off or trafficked or whatever, and they will disappear. So all our effort last year has been on knocking doors, saying, how are you? How's your daughter? How's everything going? We're running a little class just in your neighborhood, just your own neighborhood kids. Send her just so that we can have contact and she can stay engaged and she can have somewhere to be able to share, speak, and continue with some of her learning activities. So those camps are now in the recovery mode of running for over 100,000 children across around, I think around, close to 6,500 camps. And that's something we built and scaled out during the pandemic. It's like building and flying the plane at the same time. And then the third, and I think the last one, is really about reimagining. And we're saying, how do we reimagine the future so that it is more inclusive and equitable for our girls? So let's see what that lands us.
And an important part of your work is working with government, and not that we will ever be totally au fait and happy with the role of government, generally speaking, because we are far more activist than perhaps government figures, right? But tell me, what has been the intersection or the interplay between Educate Girls and government in trying to resolve the girls' education crisis where you work?
Yeah, and I think it's a really good question. I think I think the government is the main game in town. You cannot ignore the government. Civil society is like a drop and the government is like the ocean. So I think not engaging with the government is just not even, an option. We have to engage with the government. The good bit is that I think because we were doing all the relief work and we were really also trying to understand the struggles that the government had, that we've been able to build better alignment. I also feel that through the pandemic, we are listening to each other more. And I think that's the first step to anything, is I think the government has also realized that the civil society does have deeper inroads and can be of support at the front line or at the last mile. So, and right now we're working with the government quite deeply in Madhya Pradesh and other states to see what are the gaps. And also the national education policies come out. So we're trying to ideate together, saying what is it that we can do in order to be able to roll into that. So I think there is more listening, and let's hope that takes it to a deeper and a broader collaboration.
And so, Safeena, you set up Educate Girls 12 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, and you've set this blistering pace because of the injustice that you see. What is it that you're optimistic about in this situation? Not just with the learning crisis that we already faced before the pandemic, but also what we've seen over the last year. What gives you hope, and what actually what silver linings do you see coming out of the crisis that we've seen?
Yeah. I am a born optimist. I'm always optimistic. It doesn't matter what the situation. So I'm one of those psychotic people who's just like always looking at the silver lining. But I think that the pandemic was a great pause to be able for us to sit still and learn. And I think it is teaching us so much. And every day, it's almost like revealing things that we weren't seeing earlier because of the white noise of, I don't know, whatever, the commute to the office and the travel and the whatever. All that white noise is gone. And you're seeing things for what they are. And everybody's seeing that same thing, right? And I think that in itself is an opportunity, because when we come to that reimagine, that's what will help us all come together to the same place and reimagine together. And some of the thing, how quickly people have pivoted to online training, capacity building, etc. And that's a massive opportunity, right? If you want to scale, if you want to solve problems at scale and accelerate it, I think just in terms of monitoring assessment, remote assessment, surveys, very quickly you can course correct. I think just with government as well, how much we're seeing more listening and sharing. That's kind of happening. And I think the pandemic, I think everybody's also kind of moving away from reductionist pieces. Like in education, I felt like for a while, people were just very reductionist, right? They should learn how to read and write, and that's good enough, and that's good enough, right? They have to pass the 10th exam, and that's good enough. And now people are realizing that all that stuff, education is just so much more than that, right? And suddenly you're seeing people come to the table about a holistic education. about,
The whole child.
the social and the emotional learning, about building the resilience. Nobody would give you money to do a life skills program. And now people are like, oh my God, they are so important. So I think that's what I'm optimistic about, is that people will come to the table and have not a reductionist conversation, but they will have a more holistic conversation.
So, Safeena, the audience that we have in front of us today comprises mainly teachers in primary, secondary education around the world. What is your message to them as teachers? What is it that they should be doing? What is it they could be doing?
Yeah, first of all, I don't want to tell teachers anything to do because they already have such a hard job. Like, I was back in the classroom after years, and I swear to God, I was just like, oh my God, how can people do this day in and day out? Because it is exhausting. It is just such an exhausting, and it takes so much out of you. And I feel right now like I only have 10 kids in my small community classroom. And yet, I mean, they occupy all my mind space. So I'm just so in awe of teachers, who do this day in and day out. I mean, it is really, they are truly our heroes. All I would say to them is, and this just comes from my own bias, all I'd ask them to say is, in your classroom, keep that extra eye out for that girl child, right? Especially if you are in communities like where I work, just that little thing, because just remember how many things are stacked against her, right? I have a girl, Kavita, in my classroom. She's 11 years old, and every single day her parents say, well, today don't go because there are guests in the house. Today don't go because there's washing to be done. Today don't go because, we're a little late in fetching water. Every day she has to fight that little erosion of saying, just for today, don't go, right? It's as simple as that, as what is keeping her, the pressures at home. To in the classroom, a lot of our content and textbooks is not, I mean, it's full of so much gender bias, and it's full of so much, prejudices and regressive attitudes. So yes, all I would say is that just have that kindness and that little extra eye for the girl.
Safeena, my last question to you, and I know that this is something that we could learn a lot from from you, which is on the subject of leadership. If there were 2 or 3 leadership lessons that you'd like to leave us with from not just your time during the pandemic or your 12 years, but what have you learned in terms of how you become a better leader? I would love to hear your very succinct 2 or 3 bullets in that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to. I don't have, again, any gyan, any knowledge to give anyone. But all I have to say is, I think, for me at least, and I realize, like, I run an organization that has doubled in size every 18 months. It is growing at such an exponential pace, right? We work in 18,000 villages today, over 2 million children daily. I mean, it's massive, right? It's an employee base of over 2,000. But what I've learned in that entire scale journey is that the biggest bottleneck to an organization can be the founder. And therefore, and I was very lucky that people invested in my leadership. Like, they got me a mentor, they got me a professional coach, they did a lot of investment into me so that I would not hold my organization back. And I think for us to just have that self-awareness, to say, dude, you are going to be the biggest thing that's going to hold everything back. And how do we invest in it, and how do we just make sure that we work on our own leadership? And I know that if I manage my own energy and my own emotional state a little bit better, everything else will be fine. And my job is really not to come to the table in some ridiculous, agitated, rubbish state and stress everybody out. But I think that's the only thing that I've learned. And the sooner you do that for yourself, the better.
Well, Safeena, that's incredibly useful and insightful. So thank you so much for sharing that. As someone who is a member of your advisory board, I congratulate you once again on your work, and of course, all of your colleagues in India as well as other parts of the world. You are someone who I think deserves all support. And please know that in the T4 community, we're willing to put our energy behind educate girls and the subject as a whole. Thank you once again, and I hope to have you sometime later this year back on to tell us as to what new is happening with your organization. So thank you once again, and goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you so much.